Okay, first of all, let me thank you all for coming today. Welcome, and thank you for sacrificing the World Cup football. I know, I know everybody wants to watch Germany get through today to the qualifiers. So this is our first expert panel talk that DeSimone is holding, and we hope to do many more of these. And the topic of this talk is called Tall and Extraordinary Buildings and the effect after the post-pandemic and COVID. We have with us three eminent speakers, two from Zaha and my boss in the middle. The first one is Chris Lepine.
It seems like I do.
Yeah, I know I keep bothering you with my phone calls.
No, it's okay.
So the first one is Chris Lepine. He's a director from Zaha, joined in 2006.
That's right, yeah.
I'm formerly from Foster's.
You know my bio.
Well, I did my research. I'm formerly from Foster's.
That's right.
You're known for doing large architectural projects. The most famous one that we know, which we calibrated with, is 1000 Museum in Miami. And I think you've done a couple of towers in Dubai, is that correct?
Yeah. When I first started at Zaha's office, I was doing the signature towers
in Dubai. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
That's when I got you.
But it never got built.
Yeah, but
Too bad.
Probably made a lot of money on it.
our second speaker,
Ever the principal, I'm sorry.
our second speaker is Stefano Paiocchi.
Yep.
And he joined in 2013, if I remember rightly. And you're known for complex special facade and architectural structures. You did the Generali Tower in Italy, Milan.
Yep.
And famously not built yet, but fantastic building, if you get to see it, is the Mayfair Residencies in Melbourne.
Correct, yep.
You're also doing another building, which you're going to touch on today, I believe.
Yeah.
And we've worked with Stefano in the past with DeSimone. You used to sit in our New York office, is that correct?
Right, yes.
Right. And then last but not least, my boss, Stephen DeSimone. I wrote this down, Steve.
Oh, you don't have to write it down. Come on. Come on.
I wrote this down.
Dispense with this. Come on.
So you joined in 1988, that's correct?
89, but so your
Okay,
research
well,
is a little off.
We need to change the website.
Okay.
And
Fair enough. Fair enough.
and your buildings are 50 West,
Yeah.
111th Avenue, 170 Amsterdam, 220 Central Park South, what's this one? 400 Park Avenue, 610 Lexington, Central at Metro Parks, IAC headquarters, International Gem Tower, etc., etc., etc. So you can see we have three great people here to talk about tall buildings, tall and extraordinary buildings. And from there, I'm going to give my lead to Chris Lepine to start first.
Okay, I'll get started. Yes, hi, I'm Chris Lepine from Zaha Hadid Architects. I'd like to talk a little bit today about design as a motivational force in the sense that getting us out of this sort of COVID, isolation, work from home mode, and how it can entice us back to engage with our colleagues and see physical, real spaces in well-designed environments. But first, I wanted to start with some of our collaboration with DeSimone. It's our 1000 Museum. This is our residential tower in Miami. A glamour shot of it from across the bay, and of course what features very prominently is the structure. So the perfect collaboration with a great structural engineer such as DeSimone. The structure itself was innovative and quite novel, especially for Miami, as opposed to most of the moment frame structures. The brace frame allowed it to be very rigid, and the exoskeleton coming to the exterior allowed us to free plan the interior spaces. So it gave us a lot of flexibility there. It was also very innovative in terms of construction techniques. We used what was called a permanent formwork solution. So these GRC casings were fabricated in a factory, brought to site, clamped into place, and then the concrete was poured. So you wound up with the structure, facade, internal finish, all in one go. A view of it from below, looking up, how prominent the structure is. From every angle, it has a massive presence for the building, and all the way up to the very top of tower where you have an event space. The space where we celebrated the opening of 1000 Museum, we brought our design team together, all our colleagues and friends, and had a great event in February 2020. Now, of course, not more than a month later, March 2020, we had lockdown, so ushering in the work from home era. Thankfully, technology was in a position to allow continuity, allow us to continue working together. But it did really change the office landscape permanently. I'll use, actually, the project I'll talk about next. We used ourselves as a bit of a case study. So a group of us in the office, we got together, we asked ourselves, what would the post-COVID office situation look like? We did a lot of research. We looked at survey data, and we conducted our own internal surveys to see what sort of what did we want to offer staff. And the large majority of staff preferred a hybrid environment, hybrid work from home, work from the office 2 or 3 days a week each. We also asked what sorts of activities staff were most likely to do in the office. And of course, those came down to more collaborative activities, meetings especially. So that helped inform us, thinking about, how we reorganize our office space. And of course, on top of that, we had to create an enticing office space. These are some images of the before. We took a long, hard look and came to the very easy conclusion that this just wasn't going to cut it. So taking a step back, looking at how our office levels were organized, we completely did a complete overhaul, complete refurb, changing even the core around, consolidating it, letting more daylight in. Where we had workstations, only where maximum daylight was coming in, and the spaces marked A, and this sort of central space with less daylight, we created an informal meeting zone. And then, of course, a big offering of the meeting rooms themselves. And that's how our office stacks up, the lower ground areas, reception, event spaces. The levels 1 through 3 are primary working and office areas, and then something we decided that we would offer staff a completely dedicated staff breakout space. So levels 4 and a roof pavilion at level 5, completely dedicated to staff spaces where they could come together, meet informally, have lunch, or whatever. A few images of it now. It's still a bit of a work in progress, not 100% complete, but is it ever really? You'll notice the prominence of the lockers. So this is something that was, I guess, a new feature since it is work from home, work from office, hybrid working scenario. No one gets a permanent desk. It's hot desking, but you have a permanent locker. So these sorts of features had to be worked in. And this is the space that greets you as soon as you come onto the office floor plate, the informal meeting area with the large pinup space and workstations to either side. An image of you looking at some of our joinery work, trying to tuck in all that storage and also create niches so we could display the work. Because I think what's also important about offices is how they bring the office culture together, and it's great to sort of express the work that you've done and really showcase that. The opposite side of that joinery work, where we embedded our big investment in AV equipment, so very generous large meeting rooms, and state-of-the-art equipment so that we could work together physically, but also collaboratively with colleagues across the world and call into clients, colleagues, and consultants with ease. Some views of the levels 4 and 5. So this is our staff breakout space. And level 5, our roof pavilion. And it's great to see that it gets a lot of use. It's a very active space, a lot of activities planned there, especially during the spring and summer months when a lot of events get planned. So yeah, the office is can be a great environment for work and collaboration. As I mentioned, I think it has to be an enticing space. It has to, call people back. In fact, I think the office has to be even more now post-COVID than it was before. Now, I'm going to just look more closely at two projects, both of which are in Hong Kong. This first one was designed pre-COVID, but it went on site during COVID. However, a lot of the features that we advocated pre-COVID were very much appreciated, even especially more so in the post-COVID era. Big open floor plates, but as you'll see, the special levels with a lot of greenery, which we're very adamant about. The office levels themselves, very generous, high ceilings, open, lots of daylight coming in. But I think what was especially important for us were the amenity levels. Lots of greenery, lots of access to open areas, fresh air, open spaces, biophilic design, all of these things that we advocated pre-COVID that have become even more important now. This is just an image of what we refer to as the urban oasis as you first come to enter the building, surrounded by vegetation, enveloped by vegetation in a way with the tower hovering above you. Our sky gardens and breakout spaces, this will be fitted out with fitness equipment. It even has an indoor running track. And then the very top of tower, a big event space overlooking Hong Kong. So the next project, this is the XRL topside, Express Rail Link topside, so named because it sits atop the rail platforms below. Now this one was designed just as we were entering lockdown. So a large project, massively complex, and a large team, and then all of a sudden, the next day we're working from home. So we didn't even have a chance to really work together physically until next thing you know, we could only communicate virtually by calling in. So it was a very difficult, challenging time for us, but yeah, we found our rhythm and really progressed the design, and a lot of the features, as I mentioned in the previous project, we really focused on here to try to get the mix of greenery, the mix of open spaces. So one of the key features of how the organization is arranged with the two towers, they bookend a central public space, which is accessible by the public and of course open and available for office tenants. A view from the opposite side where you can see the staggering of the tops of the buildings to allow for roof terraces and these slot balconies in between. So these double height balcony areas, something that may have been, sometimes these features are difficult. You promote them to a client, you argue for them, you know that it's a key feature. Your client doesn't always agree. They ask, why do we need that? And these features often or sometimes have a habit of getting axed. In this case, though, because of where we were with the pandemic, because we were emerging out of it, tenants were especially interested in having such spaces. So it actually, we were able to keep this one without too much, opposition on it. They're double height balconies, they flip-flop, so they're either on the north or the south, but every level has one of these balconies, very large to allow a nice environment, nice access views out, as well as creating a generous planting area, as well as at the top of the tower. So we created this fairly large niche in the top office level. It creates a balcony, and what we're learning from our client is that tenants are asking for these outdoor spaces. They're very interested in having them, which is great to know. And then because of the staggering of the tops, we had a lot of opportunity to put areas such as sky gardens with offices to have direct access right onto a sky garden. So some great top of tower spaces there. And I'll just conclude with this image of it as it's getting built. One of those fast-paced projects. It seems like we're trying to stay ahead of the game. We draw things one day, send it out, and the next day they're building it. So yeah, we're just about keeping pace with it. So with that, I'll hand off to my colleague Stefano.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everybody. Well, when it comes to talk about the future is always exciting, but at the same time we cannot predict it, but it's very important to understand the social, the cultural, the market forces that affect the future, and to be able to project and affect what a plausible future could be or plausible futures can be. So looking back in the past few years, especially before COVID, I think we noticed that throughout different industries, certain characters were emerging and were shared. Like, for instance, the idea of like health and well-being, connection and collaboration, and flexible and adaptive space, and user responsive spaces. But at the same time, when COVID came, this character stayed true, but I think COVID worked almost as an accelerator and an enhancer of some of these characteristics, and basically this character became all of a sudden even more important. Like the health and well-being became a holistic way of looking at health and well-being. Like it's not only physical, but it's mental, social. Like you look at your own life as life and work balance. So same like for the connection and collaboration. We want a collaboration now and connection to be very meaningful, especially now that we work partially at home. When you go to the office, you have to be able to meet relevant people, build up team, build up the office culture, build up the staff, like mentoring, developing their skills. So how the encounter are made and where and how it becomes even more important. Same for flexibility. It is not only about being flexible and adaptable, but it has to be very fast in adapting, and the user has to be able to control the space. Like for instance, we are used now to work at home, so I can control anything, the temperature, I want this, I want light. So I want to be able to go into a space and be able to control it more directly than before. So well, today I want to talk about meaningful connection, but not as much as meaningful connection necessarily between people, but meaningful connection inside the built environment. And especially I want to talk about the idea of extraordinary grounds, so the relationship between the building and the ground. So this building here is Tower C in Shenzhen Bay at the super headquarters base. Is a building that the client came with a brief for 3 separate buildings, 2 twin towers and a cultural building, all 3 separate. But the thing that we realized earlier on is that the site was basically sitting adjacent to these amazing parks and water feature on both sides. So we thought, we don't want to impose a building, but we want to bring in this feature, the nature and the water, into the building and up into the building. So as you see here in this diagram, so we wanted to bring all these existing forces, natural forces, cultural forces into the building. And also one thing that made it easier for us to have this kind of approach was the fact that the program was also mixed use. The towers were primarily offices, but we had the cultural element, commercial elements, food and beverage, exhibition. So, but instead of keeping it separate, we wanted to bring the landscape in and fuse the three buildings in one and create a large ground connecting to the urban environment. You see here, basically, there is a podium. There is a 3-dimensional podium. It's very extended. It's 8 to 10 floors, and multiple activities are happening there. A multitude of spaces types are there. So basically, there is an active ground, a multi-layered experience that starts from the ground and it moves throughout the towers. So it's not a tower that is excluding the public or the activities, but it's actually a much more inclusive and exciting type of space and building. So in fact, we have inspiring spaces and different type of spaces. We have interconnection between the floors, and multifunctionality is very important, because on the ground we have cultural activities, exhibition, food and beverage, retail. Also and then moving on into the tower, you see that the towers are connected by a major bridge, but at the same time, the podium connects across the street to the other building adjacent, expanding the experience of the building, which becomes basically a continuous, shared, and evolving experience in this verticality. So yeah, you see here just by looking at the colors how the colors become more vibrant at the ground, but also throughout they keep changing. It's not the towers that maybe we were used to, where it's a monolithic piece, one program, one lobby is private, nobody can access it. You can look at it. Is basically there's no life around it. It's just very very sterile. By this one instead is very active. It's ever changing. It brings natures in, so automatically the seasons are brought into the building. So continuing here, you see somehow a diagram that we do mapping the variety of activities. There are, first of all, very important also, a key element that we continue thinking about during the process was the idea of blurring boundaries between not only what is natural and what is man-made, but also what is outside and what is inside, what is private, what is public. And so on, but also what is day and what is night. So the building tried to remain active as long as possible and change throughout the day with different activities in the same space using multifunctional activities. So you see some of the views of looking up into the tower, so you are able to see multiple perspectives, multiple point of views where you see different activities happening. You are not excluded, but you feel part of the activity that are taking place throughout the building, to the verticality. And then you have spaces, as I was saying, that are hybrid, semi-indoor, semi-outdoor. So you always have a relationship with nature, which is very important, not only on the ground, but throughout the tower. We were able to distribute natural aspects and landscape aspects throughout the floors going up to the tower. So the building is very active, the ground is active. It comes from the metro. Underneath the building there is a metro line at the metro stop. So from the metro you come up into such an exciting podium of 8-10 levels of activities. Then you move into the towers, you have the bridges, you have atriums that bring light down deeper into these large floor plates, right? So then you see some other spaces like covered semi-outdoor spaces. This is entrance to the cinema at the top and exhibition at the bottom, cover under the skirt of the building. And again, the building is active, also wants to remain active at night with different configuration and different activities, engaging the public to remain and enjoy the building. So, but this type of building, I think, can also be very sustainable, can offer a possibility to be sustainable, not only because the spaces are utilized way longer than normal spaces that you can use maybe 40 hours a week. These spaces are encouraged to be used longer, like maybe during the day you have a space that functions as a market, and in the evening it turns into an event space or educational space, event space. So you try to extend the life of the spaces, not only to be used privately, but also to be used to the community around. Therefore, it makes it also a very socially sustainable building. But speaking of structure, I think that in this particular case, expanding the ground creates, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, there might be the wrong place to, but I will talk about structure.
Questions are later.
Later, okay.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. So, but basically expanding the ground, basically if you look at the shape of the building, it becomes like a pyramid. So giving a much more solid base to sit on, and therefore you hope that the structure at the top remain more efficient and therefore use less embodied carbon, which usually structure of this case, they are kind of seen maybe a heavy user in terms of embodied carbon, but maybe this possibility to have a leaner or more efficient structure given the more larger base. So, but at the same time also we worked on the facade. The facade is a pleated facade which basically is used to shade the building from direct sun, but also integrates photovoltaic panels. I think in structure like this, when they are very changeable and adaptable, you also can tackle issues like maybe a housing shortage. The building is easy to adapt. Office space can convert it to housing, but also the retail experience can give another life to retail experience, becoming also a sustainable market and financial element. So yeah, basically I think that when it comes to talk about the future of tall and extraordinary building, I think for tall building to remain extraordinary and being able to face the challenges of today's challenges, but also explore the possibilities, I think they need to be able to, yes, start from the ground, I think, creating meaningful ground condition and also continuing with exciting experiences and journey that are shared throughout the towers. So, I think that the idea would be to a successful future tall building, an extraordinary one, will be able to fuse architecture, urbanism, landscape, structure, services, the client and legislator in order to create smart solution for a dense and complex urban environment like such as today. So yeah, this is my share of the
Very nice.
of the future of the tall buildings.
So
Steve?
to Stephen now.
Can we switch seats? 'Cause I can't
Absolutely,
see.
yes, exactly.
Well, if any of you came here expecting a discussion on wind tunnels and dampers, I don't mean to disappoint you, but that's not what I'm going to talk about. So what I am going to talk about, though, being let's get a little into it. Am I going the right way? Right. What I do want to talk about is sort of the trends that we've seen pre and post pandemic, and just generally where we see buildings going. Right. And I started the slide right now, like design matters more than ever, right? I think, talk of the demise of the commercial building, people working collaboratively in offices is greatly exaggerated. Cities where we're working on, particularly in North America, there's this weird thing that's happening where, 50% of the people aren't showing up to the office 5 days a week, yet rents have never been higher in the New York area, right? So what's that? There's sort of this contradiction. But look, all of those things, and I always look immediately prior to the pandemic, all of those things that made cities great in February of 2020 still exist, right? I think we're coming to a new norm, and we see more so than ever things surrounded or around flexibility really matter to people, right? When can I work? Where can I work? Do I have to be structured 40 hours a week behind my desk? Those norms are gone. But there is a need for people to get together. We see it in our office. There's something lost through teams. So more than ever, design matters. And I think that those institutions, those corporations, those developers that are willing to embrace and continue to embrace world-class design are the ones moving forward that are going to have an advantage in what is an ever-changing market. So look, whether we're doing projects in Istanbul, in the Middle East, in New York, extraordinary buildings are really the ones that are standing out. People are sort of seeking them out. They want to live, they want to work in places that they can be proud of. And so we're seeing more than ever an emphasis on good world-class design. The pandemic, unfortunately, it was co-opted, thank you, but it's definitely been an accelerator and more importantly, an amplifier of a lot of trends that we saw pre-pandemic, right? They're being really attached and integrated into buildings that we're doing, more so than we would have expected. These are changes that we would have expected to happen over a 10 or 15-year period. It's happening in a 2 or 3 year period from a planning standpoint. So, when we think about pre-pandemic, it was always outdoor space, access to light. In commercial buildings and even in residential buildings, this hospitality component to coming to work, right? It's not just about sitting at your desk, it's the opportunity to mix, to mingle, to grab a coffee, to get together with friends even, to work out where you work, right? So this idea of work as just a place, or your workspace is just a place where you show up, sit at your desk, was trending. We were trending away from that, but it's really accelerated since COVID. So, that's the benefit, but what's also happened, and we see, is COVID's really laid bare the shortcomings of some of the older buildings in a lot of markets that we're in, right? The idea that you've got a center core, 40-foot lease spans, no access to outdoor space, inoperable windows. Those are the buildings that we see are suffering the most. The building that we're in New York, the rents, we signed our lease 6 years ago, the rents right now are half of what we're paying. So if I were to sign a lease in the building today, it would be half of what I'm paying now. Okay, so that's drastic. Good if you're looking for office space, but bad if you're the owner of that building, right? So you're going to see a sort of a tectonic shift. And what do we do with these buildings, right? So that's the next thing that we need to consider. So I call it a tale of two commercial markets, right? It's sort of these new, high-performance, forward-looking buildings. Companies like Related, companies like Swire, Tishman Speyer. These are developers that are really looking forward, have always looked forward, but are really pulling those changes up. And so we see, this is a project that we're doing with Swire and Related in Miami. Look at the floor-to-floor heights. I mean, almost 5 meters floor-to-floor height, right? That's substantial, not like anything we've seen in the market before. High-performance glazing systems, extra, prevalence of this outdoor space, right? And not just outdoor space, covered, usable outdoor space, right? A terrace that's 6 feet wide with nothing overhead is not something that's particularly desirable, right? So what we're finding is that people want these intimate, cozy, if you will, spaces that they feel safe going out and venturing out in any kind of weather, right? Generous public spaces. So these are the buildings that we see are really going to be the future of commercial space, right? And to a certain extent, we're seeing sort of these boutique offices tailored for the TAMI tenant, right? Tech, advertising, media, and internet, right? Smaller scale, embracing some of the old, exposed structure, a lot of usable, again, I call it usable outdoor space, not just outdoor space for the sake of outdoor space, but places where people can get together, have lunch, even have meetings. We've seen that in some of the buildings that we're doing, right? They're setting up outdoor conference rooms as opposed to just a place where you can grab a cigarette, right? So those are really becoming important. And this kind of hospitality component, right? That there's more to work. It's not just you giving, but it's your employer giving as well, providing you with the opportunity to have concierge type services, get a cup of coffee, have friends even. We're encouraging our staff to have friends, show up, bring your dog. You're spending a lot of time in the office. It should be a positive experience. So what's happening to the other side, right? What are we going to do with those old buildings, right? So conversions from commercial to residential, we're seeing a lot of that. And so this is a project that we did, One Wall Street. It's a conversion with an overbuild, one of the largest conversions in New York at over $2 billion. So, developers are smart, they're a quick learn, so they're looking at their stock and saying, these buildings aren't going to lease, and if they do, it's going to be below cost, so we've got to do something with them. So the conversion momentum in New York and Boston and Chicago, we're seeing that really gaining speed. And then adaptive reuse as well, right? Older buildings that no longer possess the qualities that people are looking for, but have character, right? So this is a project, the Terminal Project on the west side, a landmark building that used to be a warehouse that was converted to commercial space, but nobody wanted it, right? It was useless, I should say. So kept the facade, and you can see how we're maintaining the facade, its landmark, and really building a new modern building behind the facade of what was a landmark building. So these are the strategies that we're seeing being employed currently. Here's a project that we did quickly, and I like this because it sort of embodies all of those things that we've been talking about, all of those trends that got pulled forward. Winthrop Center in Boston, it's got a little bit of everything. So we've got residential, office, we've got sort of co-working space for the office tenants as well as the residential tenants. And then we've got lobbies. The connector is a large food court and retail space, and then parking. But when we look at it, these are sort of the interesting components, right? LEED Gold certified for the residents, WELL Gold certified. It's passive house. They're using high performance exterior walls, Park Smart system, so it's an automated parking system, so you're getting more cars and less space, super efficient, resiliency measures were adopted, water management, well beyond my expertise as just a structural engineer, but this is really the culmination of a lot of trends that we have seen. Millennium Partners is a development client that we've had for 25 years. We've probably done 30 projects with them, so very forward-looking. Hendel and Associates was the architect. Again, a client that we've done probably 30 or 40 buildings with. So this is a great collaboration with that team. And again, different, right? We talked about the center core, the 40-foot lease span. Here you've got a T-shape. And which is interesting about this is you've got significantly greater perimeter for the same enclosed area, right? So the dimension from the exterior glass to the workstations is less. So everybody really has that access to natural light. Every floor has outdoor space. So it's an interesting way to plan, not as formulaic as previous incarnations of commercial buildings, but one I think that's valuable, and they're seeing it in the leasing because the building's coming online now. So it's interesting to see the response. And again, just some of the images, double height space. And again, the outdoor space is usable, right? Places that you can actually go. You know, we're doing, I didn't want to talk about wind tunnels, but we do, I don't want to call it pedestrian level, but occupant comfort on those levels. Great, you put a balcony or a covered space on the 50th floor. Is it really a hospitable space, right? Is that wind climate such that you can actually go and have lunch or a conversation and you'd be comfortable doing that? So that's what a lot of people and a lot of our clients are looking at. And now that was commercial. From the residential, what are we seeing there, right? Work from home is now work at home, right? Work from home seems to indicate that it's temporary, right? People are working at their homes now. And so we need to adjust to that. And what's interesting, from the residential side, we're seeing those developers, they're reacting much faster than the commercial developers. And the to-let, is that how you say it? Not toilet, right? To-let developers are reacting even faster. Because what's interesting is their product is churning every year or 2 years, right? So they get incredible, the feedback loop for them is rapid. And they're willing to make those changes very quickly. So outdoor space, again, sort of traditional outdoor space. This is a project that we did in Miami. Pools and spaces to meet and sunbathe. You can see these images. There's not a lot of people out there, right? Because they're not particularly hospitable. So the new thing that we're seeing is, I don't want to call it, we're not calling it outdoor space. We're calling it an extension of indoor space, right? So we've got balconies covered that are almost 4 meters in width. And it really becomes an extension of the living space. So where you've got a living room, normally a living room, glass, and a terrace, now you've got these collapsible doors, sliders, and it really, that terrace space becomes an extension of the living space. So that's something that we're seeing a lot. This is a project that we did with Renzo Piano in Miami. I should be mentioning these names. I hope they're not listening.
By the way, it's live streaming, by the way.
Oh, it's live streaming. So
I forgot to tell you guys. It's actually live streaming.
So no wisecracking. And then on the amenities space, in the day it was always lap pools and golf simulators. But that's really changing now. I think what we're seeing, and these are images from a couple projects, people are working at home, but they don't want to work in their apartments anymore, right? And the idea of building dedicated rooms for a home office, particularly on a rental building, is actually a waste of space, right? Because people are looking at price point. They want a 1-bedroom at X per month. So what developers are doing is they're taking away from those traditional amenities that people don't really use, and they're putting it into real co-working spaces that are co-located within the residential building. So conference space, individual offices. This is a project that we did in New Jersey. Lounges, places that you can hold meetings, but you don't have to leave the comfort of your building. And so we're seeing that. And again, that's a market that's really reacted and really pivoted very quickly. So again, things that we've seen, things that have been in the market, but things that are really getting pulled up and integrated into projects significantly faster than we would have thought. Now, there's things like sustainability, resiliency. I can give a talk on wind tunnels and dampers. That's a whole other discussion that we can set that for the next one.
Yes.
But again, this is kind of the bird's eye view that we see. And again, being uninitiated in this market is going to slaughter you from an owner, from a developer standpoint. So we're looking at all of the ways. Chris and Stefano did a great job, so it's hard to follow them. But what are the things that people are integrating into their buildings to get people out, right? Get people back. So I think that's it for me, and that's it. So we go to Q&A.
Excellent. So the next part, well, let's give them a clap. Thank you very much. So before I open it up to all of you guys, because I know you've got questions but to ask these guys, I'm going to give them a couple of difficult ones to answer.
Are those the ones you sent us in advance? Or?
Yeah. Which I never got for some reason. So Chris, I'm going to start with you first.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, you working from home, how did that affect your team and the conditions and what you got from that? How did that affect the design of your buildings afterwards?
Yeah. Well, that when we had that sort of first work from home, the first lockdown, I showed an image of the project we had just started. It was a real challenge. No one had ever worked like that before. We, in fact, made an effort to get the entire team into one studio, one room, so that we had pin-up space and we'd do drawings, we'd do sketches, we could look at each other's screens, and the feedback was immediate. You could just pin stuff up. If you saw something that needed to change or adjust, you could act on it right then. As soon as work from home came in fact, I think we even started on Skype. That's we were still using Skype, and then eventually that evolved into Teams, and then
say even I'm not that late, but carry on.
But well, it was sort of a hodgepodge of who had what installed on their machine at the time, and we were just finding our feet. So the way the team had to work together is we'd have daily morning meetings, and they would end up taking forever. You couldn't get to each point that you needed to. You spent a lot of time chasing each other, and the communication loop was just very slow. Eventually that picked up. Technology such as Zoom was quite helpful. We were able to sketch on top of each other's stuff and send out the information more quickly. But we just had to adjust. Basically, we were all working much longer. In fact, we found instead when we were working together. But we had to maintain quality. So how do you do that? It really did mean that we spent. There was a big time investment in just being able to communicate the ideas. But we had to learn really quickly how to sketch stuff out, photograph it with our phones, send it over, Zoom sketches, and eventually we got into the rhythm and were able to bring the team together. The one area where it did help us, though, is working with our Hong Kong office. It sort of, leveled the office playing field. So there was no more this separation we felt between the two offices. We were one unified, we were all in the same boat. So in fact, we were all communicating in the same way. So that picked up and that helped us. And in fact, a lot of the coordination that we would do with our Hong Kong office actually was helped. And I guess after a few months, we got used to it, found a rhythm, and were able to carry on. How it affected the design, I don't know. It's really hard to say. But
how did it so your new designs and your new buildings, how did you relate that in terms, I need to get these guys out of the home and back into the office? How did you, what was your thinking to get that actually done, to get the people back into the office from their home? Did you change, like we were talking about higher floor to ceiling heights? Did you be able to bring more lights into the building? You've got your events on your top floor in your new offices.
Yes, as I presented, our own office refurb was a bit of a case study on ourselves, where we had to look at how the office working environment had changed permanently and how we were going to entice people back in, because you can't replace that sort of immediate face-to-face collaboration, and we knew that was a key aspect of what the new office was all about. It wasn't about maximizing workstations and everybody's sort of slotted in working all day, and I think we all touched on that in our various presentations. We recognized early on that we had to make an offering,
Correct.
Why is someone going to make the effort if they could work from home, and now that they've gotten used to that, why would you make the effort to come into the office? So we recognized that we had to create that enticing environment. Yep. We recognized that we did need it, because the sort of office culture, when we bring new staff in, we need to bring them into the fold, pass on our skills as well as how we do things in our office. And how can you do that if you're working remotely? So it was very important that we were able to bring everyone back in. And yes, offering an entire level and a half that was just completely dedicated to staff breakout space was something that we would never conceive of pre-pandemic. But it became a sort of a natural, something that we would naturally offer now. And it's been very successful. People really enjoy coming to the office now.
Okay, thank you. Stefano, Tower C. How many examples have you seen of the enlargement when the tower hits the ground to offer people in? Are there many?
I think that the enlargement of the ground comes down to kind of the social life. Try to grab that social life that happens in the streets, right? That standard buildings that we know from the past were just isolating themselves from the street life and they were dead. But I think part of what Chris was saying, I think bringing people back in is because also the social aspect. One thing that I suffered myself during the COVID is that I couldn't stay home more than 3 days consecutively. I needed to re-engage with the city, with the life that I could see in the city, even there was little. But seeing some lights on in the city and being able to grab lunch outside, and I needed to do that. So, but to talk about example, back in the days, I think architects that were building the first tower, the first pioneering towers, even in New York, like if you think about the Seagram building in New York, like one thing.
Mies van der Rohe, is that right?
Yeah, Mies van der Rohe, exactly. I think the important thing, that tower apparently looks like a glass tower, but one thing that's very important that Mies van der Rohe thought about it was like, instead of putting the tower adjacent, like on the line of the Park Avenue alignment, because he wanted the tower to be seen, so he said he wanted to set it back, but by setting it back, so from the sidewalk you could see the tower, but at the same time he created a plaza in front. And you guys are from New York, right, Stephen? Like you will see that if you go on Park Avenue during lunchtime, that is the only active area along Park Avenue where people can sit, gather, and they love it, especially when it's sunny. I mean, across the street there is Lever House, which offers similar covered outdoor spaces. Yep. Yes, so, but I think, the example like a pioneering tall building like that, they were already thinking about capturing the life of the street and being able also to offer it to the people in the building, because you don't want to live a life where you park in the parking, take the elevator, go down, and then go home. Of course, that promotes an unhealthy living. right? How, and also like not only like urban life has brought us many good things, right? But I think it has isolated us from nature, and we feel it now. It has isolated us from our body. We sit in the car, we sit on the computer, we sit on the couch, and so we now feel that no, we need to re-engage with health. It's very important because also mental. So I think doing exciting and extraordinary buildings that are able to inspire people to go see and spend time there, also activities out beyond the office hours, right? Like go to a theater, for instance, or go to a play inside the building. You know that it's happening. You know, oh, today I go there maybe because also I can learn something there, or you know, I get enriched, I get nurtured by the experience of not just sitting at home and watching on the video what's happening in the office or in the life. But I think that's what I think an extraordinary building should be able to do, just continue promote the social interaction and the urban life.
I noticed.
But one other thing, I think other example of grounds that are becoming more active in denser environment. If you think about Hong Kong, but also if you think about Seoul, many of the streets now are occupied by multiple level of commercial spaces, like from retail, F&B, and so forth. So I think in dense environment, I think is needed to explore the ground floor as a more three-dimensional and active ground.
And I noticed from Tower C, in terms of the mix, it was commercial, hospitality, but I didn't see much residential.
No, in fact, yeah, good point. In that particular case, residential wasn't part of the scheme. There was hospitality, there was culture, exhibition, F&B, commercial, retail, cinema, theater, a ballroom. But yeah, not residential yet there. But I think we hope that for the future, I think spaces can be, also offices can be readapted to accommodate for residential usage, which share some of the desire that office have, like having a, Chris was showing like the idea of balconies, so the idea of these usable outdoor spaces that are covered, but they are outdoor, and if you feel you can always have a fresh air and spend time outdoor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there was something just that. One of the examples I showed was a project we did with Turnberry, and I said some of the spaces were a little inhospitable, but there's some really great covered areas, and Stefano talks about what we're doing at the ground plane. They have created these incredible social spaces up in the sky, right? And I think that's something that we've always had, you know, we've always drawn them with the hopes that somebody would actually do them, but in those projects they really did. And so you kind of have the uncovered space, which is sort of was typical, but then they have these atypical, almost half floor of covered outdoor space, 30, 40 stories in the air. That's really spectacular and a great place for residences to sort of come together. They don't have to take the elevator down, they're kind of halfway up, and they've got pools and places to meet. And so I think that outdoor, that connection, you mentioned the biophilia, you know, we just see that that's more, it's expensive space, right? It's more expensive than the interior.
That's prime space.
Yeah, it's prime space, but that developer understood the value of it and wanted to do something different, and that building in and of itself is super successful. So.
Okay, excellent. So, brings it on to you, Stephen. So I'm going to ask you a bit more technical in terms of living workspaces and restorations and converting buildings. Is there much in terms of restorations, in terms of recyclable steel, carbon embodiment? Is that why you see people doing this, or is this mainly for the pandemic or for the COVID?
Well, I think a lot of times these repurposed buildings are done so for a reason, right? And then we always create the backstory, right?
Yeah.
So in an instance with the terminal project where we're keeping the facade and probably about a third to a half of the existing structure, there's a great argument to be made from a sustainability standpoint that, hey, we're not putting, you know, all of this material into a landfill, right? We're not adding to the overall embodied carbon because it's already there, right? So I think there's an argument to be made on that front. But yeah, listen, anytime we get to reuse, look, most of the steel available in the U.S. is it's 97% recycled content for the most part, right? So that we have it. On the concrete side, you know, a lot of our clients are asking about embodied carbon, and we've developed some tools, proprietary tools to do that, looking at cement replacements other than slag or fly ash, because we're running out of fly ash because we're not burning coal anymore, right? So we're looking at glass as a replacement. So yeah, I think there's opportunities, right? But you've got to have a client that's willing, look, nothing, it's cheaper in the long run, but it's always a little more expensive up front. So you've got to have somebody that's thinking not about the next 5 years, but thinking about the next 50. So yeah, but those are great examples of reusing and the impact on sustainability for sure.
Okay. Thank you very much again. So I'm going to, well, do you want to clap the panels again? So I'm going to open the floor now. So anybody who wants to ask any questions to our three panelists, please.
Hello, Carlos. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question specifically for Chris and Stefano, if possible, and it's that creativity thrives under constraints. However, we are pushing ever more for sustainable design for next Europe. And my question is if that net zero is over constraining our designs, and how do you feel that the sustainability targets are affecting the way that Zaha Hadid is designing and the formal conception of the buildings, and if it's going to change the architecture in the future, in the sense that there is not going to be this flexibility, not flexibility, but freedom to experiment and try new things.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll start on that one. It's a great question. I think it's one that we all ask ourselves. Rather than seeing it as a constraint, I really see it as opening up creativity. I think sometimes constraints force us to be creative. I mean, it's, you know, the low carbon, net zero. These are all targets that we need to address. We need to take seriously, and we are taking them seriously at our office. And I think most architecture and design offices are taking this very seriously. And I think it's not just us as designers; it's the whole industry. So we're actually finding products that are very cleverly produced, cleverly recycled. The reuse of buildings themselves, I think that's why just our own office refurb was a fun project, a case study, not just in how we were going to provide an offering to our staff, but it was, we were very conscious of the sustainability impact and efforts on that. We recycled as much as we could. We used sustainable products. Something I didn't show, we have a beautiful cork feature that's made out of completely recycled cork. It didn't show up in the slides because it wasn't installed in time, but we now have it in our office, so I invite anyone to come by and have a look. But all of these factors, yes, it does change how we think about design, those first steps, but it does force us to be creative, but it also allows us to make arguments. How can we make buildings even more interesting because of these constraints?
Yeah, well, I can only stress what Chris said, and maybe add that as we experience in the office, I think working with sustainability in mind, I think it opens up a possibility for new aesthetics. I think we use material that maybe we didn't use before, and you use it in a way that you haven't used them before, and they create a new aesthetic. I think that is no less than the one you had before. Actually, it has the premium of going towards the right direction. So I think it's very welcome to work towards net zero and be considerate of the environment that I think every good architect in history has always done anyway. But not be wasteful, and you know, that's all how I was stressed what Chris has said. Yeah.
you didn't ask the question, but I'll answer one, right? I think, and you guys, as a structural engineer, because I know you're a structural engineer, you might appreciate it. We find that the push for net zero is actually been a catalyst to integrate new materials from a structural standpoint. You know, from a material use standpoint, we've found change has been really slow, stateside at least, right? You know, using carbon fiber was unheard of 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We've been using it in, you know, fits and spurts for years, but, you know, getting somebody to truly embrace the idea of, you know, a fiberglass or carbon fiber reinforcing bar in a balcony is been very difficult. But when we couch that discussion in terms of sustainability and cement replacement and using glass, you know, people are starting to think and starting to willing to embrace that change of material a little faster because they're trying to achieve those targets. So,
Thank you. Any more questions?
Simon Thomas from Morris HP. It's interesting, just, you know, you look at these great buildings like Seagram, and these epoch changes, post-war led to frugality, it also led to an explosion in material science, so we saw efficiencies. Do you see that with the paucity of materials, you've got to use more, do more with less? From an engineer, do you see the emerging trends about where we might be going? Because as a practice, we've always thought about doing first principles, you know, the celebration of engineering. Do you see that that efficiency is going to come back, a frugality, but with an elegance?
yeah, so I think, look, as structural engineers as opposed to mechanical engineers, right, we're really about embodied carbon, right? And so we've always talked about sustainability in terms of optimization of material, right? So what we're seeing, you know, in this push to net zero is essentially for us using less of everything. But there's a benefit to that because, you know, those buildings cost less ultimately. So for us, it's been about investing in different types of analysis methodologies, right? Performance-based seismic design, performance-based wind design now. How do we, and one of the things that we've been doing as a firm is monitoring buildings post-completion. How are they performing against what our models told us they would do? And we're finding there's quite a bit of fat there, right? You know, buildings tend to be stiffer than we think. So to the extent that we can quantify that and then create this loop whereby we're measuring building performance and then calibrating the models to get closer to the way they're behaving, that's optimization as well, which in turn leads to less material usage. So it's a constant, if you look at the amount of materials that we did on a 50-story building 15 years ago versus today, it's probably about 15 to 20% less, just because we're able to kind of cut it a little closer because we have way more confidence in the analysis that we're doing because we're calibrating against you know, measurements of completed buildings. So we feel comfortable pushing it and pushing it. So I think that there's going to be a lower bound to that, right? With the current set of tools that we have, but you know, there's still room for us to run in that regard, I think.
Can I make a request? Can you edit that part out, please? That's our USP here in terms of performance design and the carbon embodiment. You don't want to give ideas out to too many engineers.
That's okay.
Next question?
So I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is more technical. The second one is a bit more fun.
Okay.
Start with technical.
There you go. Here we are.
To build up to that specific answer, nowadays technology advances so we can model our building more accurately, more efficiently. So if you look back to the building built back in the 1990s, you can actually, as you said earlier, you can see so much fat in it. So my question to you is, how feasible is it to not just recycle steel, but literally reuse them, disassemble the steel building, reuse them, or existing concrete structure, strengthen it, put more story on top, and you've got a new building.
So the second part's easier, right? So we've done that a lot, right? And usually there's a regulatory reason why, right? A lot of buildings, and I'll use New York as an example, you know, we've got zoning laws that have changed, and you've got an older building that's actually overbuilt, and if you tore it down, you wouldn't be able to build as much, right? So adapting and reusing and adding to that even, we do. You know, we're investing a lot of effort now, I don't want to call it modular, but in pre-manufactured buildings, and so to me, that is an area where you probably stand the better chance of building something and then maybe 20 years from now taking parts of it off and reusing them. It's a great question. I don't know, I don't have a great answer, unfortunately, for that part. But yeah, I mean, the idea that, you know, the question becomes really, is it ever going to be cheaper to take something from an existing building and repurpose it versus just recreating it from scratch, right? And I don't know that we're there yet, but as material costs increase, I'm sure that that curve will cross and it will start to make some sense.
And just to give you a bit of background, I used to do a lot of refurb building. At the moment, a lot of the oil and gas industry, basically they overorder so much steel work. And instead of melting the steel, you can basically reuse them. Anyway, the fun question is, you guys been to New York, of course. In Central Park, in the south, you have these amazing, slender, tall, beautiful little skyscraper residential ones. But they're expensive, and you know it's so hard to, especially nowadays, net zero and all these things, is not very environmental friendly. So, personal preference, do you prefer to build this beautiful little slender building, or do you prefer, you know, the refurb that we talk about that make existing better?
I believe you can never have a building that's too tall. So, look, I'm all about sustainability. To me, it's like a diet. You know, you always get a cheat day. So to me, those buildings really, to your point, look, they make sense because you can sell them at such a premium. But when you look at, you know, the amount of energy, literally, that goes into making a building 1,500 feet tall that's 50 feet wide is absurd, right? I love the technical challenge of it. It impresses me what they've done. So to me, that's almost a guilty pleasure. But those buildings, I think, are driven as much by ego as they are by economics, right? So, but they're amazing. They're amazing to look at, right? Blow your mind away.
Maybe
No, I was just going to say, I think we always have to aspire to build beautiful, great buildings and have that as part of our building stock, with an eye on the sustainability, an eye on use of materials. But reusing buildings is also fun because they have a character that you just can't get from a new build. They have constraints that you wouldn't normally consider. And as I think I mentioned in the previous question, is it forces you to be creative in a different way. And the outcome is unknown. You just don't know what you're going to do with a pre-existing building. And that's a lot of fun in and of itself. It has a certain beauty and charm that's very different from, you know, just going all out and doing something from scratch.
And it gives you perfect background to kind of have a contrast with. But I go back maybe to the first question, to add one thing about reusing steel. I think I came across a very interesting business model recently about steel, but steel for facades, not steel for structure. This company, Tata Steel, they do steel for facades, elements, and so forth. They said that they are rethinking their whole process from the furnace to the steel. And what they do now, they think of steel not as a commodity, but as a service. So basically they give you the steel for the facade, but it's like you rent it, and they come and re-get it and repurpose it because also the scarcity of material now. So I think these are models that I think, business models that, you know, are very creative at the same time, that you don't see it as a commodity anymore, but you see a steel and somebody is responsible for go and get it. It's not the architect that needs to repurpose it, or, you know, it's exactly the fabricator that. is responsible for his own material and the life of it, and, you know, to long term. I found it very interesting, that model, yes. Because also otherwise there are markets that tend to die. If you don't renew the furnaces, you're not able to attract talents in industries that maybe that they don't have a future themselves, so they are not sustainable anymore as future because they are so dirty that people don't want to work there, you know, don't want to buy things from them, but having this reinvent themselves might give them a brighter future.
Okay, so I see that time's ticking away, so 1 or 2 more questions. Yes, from the back. And we have a mic, apologies.
Hi, my name is Vikram. I'm not from an engineering background at all. I'm more from a legal background. I just wanted to ask those 3 guys there. We talk about future and extraordinary. What is the future, and how long extra and ordinary are going to be bonded? Is it those buildings or whatever development we're doing? They're going to be again ordinary, or they'll maintain that extraordinary level in a way, because we do buildings for a purpose, and it attracts certain audience somehow, somewhere. But is it to the ordinary layman outside? You have these all in your views when you're designing those buildings, or what's the future we're talking about?
I think that's one for the architects.
Maybe I'll try. I think hard about the same question. I think about this question often. Well, I think that the future will look a lot about the past. From one reason, I think as human, like I think we have a connection to buildings as well. I think buildings are able to create somehow a collective identity to which we kind of connect to, right? And they form our identity, and I think in that sense, you rather live in a nice neighborhood than an ugly neighborhood, right? And because that become part of your own identity, I think building in the future will continue to be exciting in a sense because of this connection that we have to them, and the enrichment that they can give to our life, and also they become a vehicle for our culture to materialize and therefore inspire us to continue in life, right? And aspire to be better, create better society, and evolve the culture. That's one way I would think it. Specifically, how they will look, we'll have to see. But I think some of the things that we have seen on the screen today are somehow plausible futures that are about to happen.
Yeah, I don't think extraordinary. Like we showed you all the sexy stuff. I mean, but I think, look, in the future, moving forward, like an extraordinary building can be a building that solves a problem, right? I mean, we've got an incredible housing shortage, right? Are there building techniques, building materials that we can use that can solve that problem? And to me, you know, when I look at the work that we're doing in the prefabricated world, those buildings, you know, if we can succeed, can be extraordinary, as extraordinary as some of the ones that we've showed you. So, you know, I think it's what you make of it, right?
But it's very true that they solve problems, right? Like at different levels, like the building that I showed at Tower C, like the idea of the need for nature and health in our life, right? Bring it into a building, becomes a building that is extraordinary because exactly serves a purpose. And yeah, so I think.
Okay, final question. Oh.
I have a question. As we're seeing more kind of extreme weather events, will we find that in terms of design and structure, buildings will start to get kind of more extraordinary and unusual to withstand those extreme weather events? Or will they kind of stick to what's worked in the past, you know, with the hurricanes and heat, extreme heat that we've been seeing in recent years? Is that having an effect on design going forward as we see more of those kind of events?
Just structurally, we're seeing, you know, a lot of clients that are building buildings for themselves are looking beyond codes and trying to predict, or having us and the wind tunnel try to predict, you know, the impact of climate change, on weather patterns, on wind speeds. Look, I think the mistake that we always make after a big hurricane or a tornado is we think, well, let's just throw more load at these buildings with the hopes that they'll perform better. And that's not really the case. I mean, we see a lot of times post-hurricanes in areas, like we just had the big hurricane in Florida, you know, a lot of it had nothing to do with wind load or wind speed. It had everything to do with construction and the quality of the construction or the lack thereof, right? And so it's starting to impact what we're doing, you know, but again, how do you take a smarter approach, and ultimately, what are the goals, right? What is the performance goal? What is it that you're looking, if you're a bank, if you're Goldman Sachs, and you've got a hurricane come through, you know, look, these are financial institutions that have to, you know, portray or project a sense of, you know, invincibility, right? So they may want to spend more, right? So that after a hurricane, there's no broken glass. The MEP systems are fully operational, right? They've got N+1 redundancy. So, you know, I think people are talking about it and thinking about it. The impact ultimately, it comes down to money, right? How much are you willing to spend to keep a building operational post some defined event? So it's impactful.
Okay, just one more. I know the gentleman at the back with the glasses. Do you want to answer your question? Ask your question.
Hello, Adrian from LVI Associates. What I wanted to know is, obviously, you had these amazing spaces in New Jersey based around, obviously, more home-like spaces within the office. And then, obviously, as the years have come since the pandemic, you've adapted more to working from home. There's always been a percentage of people who prefer to work within office 5 days a week. So I'm curious, have you seen that number start to decline as time has gone by? Or have those people started to sort of make more use of those indoor spaces?
Well, I still work 5 days a week, routine. Stephen?
You know, I think we're hitting an equilibrium. You know, I mean, I think at the beginning, and as a firm leader, I had to learn that, right? You know, I think the idea of working 5 days exclusively at home sounded good for a lot of people, but you know, that lack of socialization, mentoring. You know, I found that at one point, you know, we had 300 and something people working from home. It was like 300 different offices, right? Everybody was kind of working in an isolated manner, very little in the way of collaboration. So we're seeing that pendulum kind of naturally swing where people are coming. We've asked them to come back 3 days a week, and they are. And there are, look, there's a certain group of people who have always come in 5 days a week, even through the pandemic. So what we're seeing is
the
that
older people.
Yeah, we know. we can name them on 5 fingers and toes. But I think what we've found and what we're hearing is just flexibility, right? We're professionals. If I need to take my daughter to the doctor, you know, do I need to take a vacation day or can I just do it and catch up on work, you know, when I get home that evening, right? So I think that's kind of what people are yearning for. And a Friday off is always great, right? To make a 3-day weekend. So I think we're equilibrating. Look, I was 5 days a week during pandemic. It was difficult to get into the city, but I made it a point. Like I was the captain of the Titanic. I was going down with the ship, right? But now, hey, I hate to admit it, and it's being broadcast, so it's going to probably cost me. You know, having the ability, Fridays for me are always like calls, internal meetings, you know, from 9 till 2. The ability to do that from home on a Friday, it's kind of nice. It's hard to argue that one, right? So, but then again, you know, I think it's options, right? Hey, the opportunity to go in to an office that you'd like to go into, the ability to work in your apartment in your pajamas one day, and the ability maybe to go to the common area in your building and work with people who you don't normally work with, where you can, you know, socialize, meet people. Look, I think we're social beings just naturally. So yeah, I think flexibility seems to be the word.
I have to agree.
Right?
It's all about the flexibility. Being able to determine your own work week is a huge, I think, benefit to the way we work now. As I mentioned, we did a lot of the research and different surveys. We did our own internal surveys. There is a proportion of staff that would prefer 5 days a week in the office, but the vast majority, they just want to sort of be in charge of their own destiny, their own sort of work-life balance. And I think, as you were mentioning, you know, that maybe that one day that you work from home, that you can mix up what hours you dedicate to work, and if you have to run an errand or you have to wait for that package to come one day, you can, and you can just carry on. And there are certain tasks that you can actually do better when you're, you know, working from home. And I think that's what we were trying to promote, is that we actually had a matrix of tasks. What can you do better in the office? What can you do better at home? And there are tasks that you can just simply do better at home, like on that Friday. You can just crank through all of the stuff that you just can't get to when you're in the office. So yeah, I think it's actually been an eye-opener, almost enlightening. When work from home first occurred, I was completely against it. I was like, there's no way we can work like this. But I've sort of grown to embrace it.
So we have afternoon drinks on Fridays to make sure people come in on Fridays.
That's the best too. Yes. Yeah, but some people are just showing up for the drinks.
Exactly.
Is that it?
Okay, so I'd like to say thank you very much for being here and listening to the three panelists. Again, if you could just give them one more round of claps. Like I said, this is the first of many. Our next discussion is going to be on, am I right, Nick, on facades? Yeah. And we're aiming to have that one, what, January, February? Yeah. So please keep a watch on your LinkedIn, your emails for more invitations, and hopefully you will join us on our next one. So thank you very much. Okay.